Kia ora everyone, welcome along to tonight's second presentation with guest presenter Jade Winter from Jade Winter Nutrition. Now, Jade is going to be talking to us tonight about a whole range of topics that all relate but expand on the presentation from a fortnight ago. If you've missed that presentation, feel free to go back and search for it on YouTube. I will link that in the description in both the VIP Facebook group and in the YouTube description. But Jade is a fantastic nutritionist. She has a Bachelor of Sports and Leisure Studies. I think that was out of Waikato. Is that right, Jade?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
And a Master of Health Science and Human Nutrition, where she did, or with distinction as well, I might add, where she did her research into bone health, menstrual cycles, and nutrition for female athletes and active women. She is a registered nutritionist with Nutrition Society of New Zealand. But she's not just all about the academics. She's a very practically orientated person. And she is also very active herself. She's represented New Zealand in the age group triathlon team at the long distance world champs back in 2014, pre-children. And currently, post-children, she's training for the coast to coast. So she has been there and done the practical application of all her nutrition. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Jade. If I press the right button here, make host. Jade, welcome. Thanks for taking your time to present to everyone today. You should have control to be able
Yep.
to
I
start
see.
your
I've
sharing
got the
screen.
ropes.
I'll leave you
Cool.
to it. I'll mute and be quiet.
Cool. Kia ora, everybody. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. Just give me a tick. It's always a bit funny hearing about what you've done. It all feels like so long ago. And I'm also very glad that this is virtual because I feel a little bit homeless. I fell asleep with a 3-year-old and I haven't showered since training today. So that's mum life for you. I am quite grateful that you can't see me in person. Um, awesome. So, I've shared this. I've shared it at the wrong point. Just give me a tick. Where are we? There we go. Better. Okie dokie. So building on from our first session together, we are looking at fueling, recovery, and red flags. So last time we looked at our top five, sort of nailing the basics or the base of the pyramid, and just revisiting those. So fruit and veggies, protein source with every meal, more than an hour you need to fuel before you shower. Vitamin D in regular meals and snacks. And if you wanted more details on those, feel free to watch that first recording. Just reiterating though that this is sort of our pyramid, and what we're aiming for is on the right. And without nailing those basics first, anything you pop on top of that, whether it's supplements, sports foods, periodized nutrition around training, is going to be compromised, and you're probably not going to get the best out of it, including training. So just really focusing on those basics, and sometimes they take a little bit longer to nail. So don't be mean to yourself if you haven't quite got there. Sometimes it does take us a while to actually get into the habit of doing those things. Okie dokie, we're going to jump straight into it. It looks like the G's moved down off my fasting. So first thing I'm going to talk about is fueling prior to training. So the first point I want to make here is that it doesn't matter how long your session is, okay? So, I mean, obviously a 20-minute walk with a dog or something, we're not going to be thinking about that. But training, we're thinking, anything that is in your training plan. So whether it's a 30-minute run or whether it's a 3-hour bike ride, yeah? So it doesn't matter how long your session is. I'm a firm believer that you need to fuel before your training. There is a lot out there about fasting, and fasting works for a very small minority of people. So, you'll always see those things online about training fasted and fat adaptation and things like that, which we will talk about a little bit. But on the whole, we know that particularly for women, no matter whether or not you are menstruating, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, it absolutely, you're going to get more out of yourself if you are fueling with carbohydrates prior to training. Um, if you are male or female and you're training at a moderate to high intensity, you also need carbohydrates. So basically, that's everyone, yeah. It covers everybody. So carbohydrates, type matters. So we're looking for, when we're fueling prior to training, we're looking at predominantly carbohydrates. It can be really simple to think, okay, what's going to give me the most amount of calories? And that would be something quite fatty. But fat is really slow to digest. And it may also cause issues if we don't have enough time to break it down. So, if we're getting up for an early morning swim and we have a couple of tablespoons of peanut butter, for example, we're just not going to get the same result out of that as we are a jam sandwich or something like that on the way to training. We need to, you need to find your level of comfort with the timing around fueling. So, for example, I've always been really lucky in the sense in that I can basically be running out the door and having something. So, whether that's a jam bagel or whatever. Some people do need like half an hour to an hour. So thinking about that, I mean, I remember years and years ago when I was rowing up at Karapiro and we were getting up at before 5 a.m. to travel out to the lake. And I remember like having a muffin or something like that next to my bed and actually just like the light's not even on and I'm still asleep basically and I'm eating this muffin. So find what you like, find however works for you for the time of day. If it's in the car, if it's at your desk, if it's running out the door with the kids chasing you, like whatever that looks like. And making sure actually you're hydrated because if you're not, then it's going to be really hard for your body to absorb and to use those carbohydrates effectively. So when we're dehydrated and we're taking carbohydrates, our intestinal or our the way the fuel moves through our intestines is compromised if we're dehydrated, which is why we see in endurance athletes gastrointestinal distress in longer events and maybe warmer climates when people are like, I don't know what happened there. I had heaps of carbs, like I had all my carbs, I think I had enough fluid, probably haven't had enough fluid. They probably haven't had too much carbs because it's actually quite hard to do. They probably just haven't had enough fluid and probably not enough sodium. And the food has sat in that intestine for too long, it's become compromised, and then they've got, those nasty symptoms. So basically, staying hydrated throughout the day. I mean, obviously, if you're getting up in the morning, like that's hard to do, have a few swigs of your drink bottle, take a drink bottle with you to the pool or to Velocity or whatever you're doing. There are some images there just showing you what that looks like. So, obviously if it's that time of day, if it's lunchtime or whatever, you might have a chicken wrap. Um, if it's, breakfast and you've got a bit of time, you might have some porridge with a drizzle of maple or something on top. Hot cross buns and fruit buns are really good because they're absorbed quickly into the bloodstream. Good old banana, nice and easy, nice and portable. Our tortellini, rice snacks, things like that. I mean, obviously, if you've got homemade food, awesome. If you don't, those are good back pocket options. These are just some ideas. I'm not going to read them all to you. I can once again provide the slides, or I'm pretty sure I'll have a PDF of this somewhere as well that I can provide. I did get a question about a protein cheat sheet as well, so I will have one of those somewhere in my electronic filing system, which I just cleaned out, that I can provide to Ray and he can, or I can somehow put it on the Facebook page or something for you all to look at. Cool, so I'm going to focus a little bit on carbs because I think there's been, well, from my perspective, being in the industry, there's been a huge drive in the last 10 years around, and quite a lot of pressure around fat adaptation, particularly for endurance athletes. And basically, I just want to highlight carbohydrates. They really are little legends in the game of sport. If we think about basic sports physiology and how muscles are fueled and how we create energy, it's actually from glycogen, which is carbohydrates. There are different types of carbohydrates, though. Some are best used when we need them really quickly, when we're running, biking, swimming, or doing something really, really active. And some are better for our main meals and are more nutritious in that sense. So if we think about carbohydrates and I guess the risks with not having enough, obviously fatigue. So one of the biggest reasons I see fatigue in athletes that I work with is because they're not consuming enough carbohydrates. Immunity is another one. So if I see an athlete and they're like, I just get sick all the time, I get sick all the time, they might be having enough energy, so they might be getting enough dietary fat to sort of make their energy intake high enough. If they're not getting enough carb and they're not utilizing that fat properly or being able to convert it over to glycogen to fuel the muscle, then we end up with decreased immune function and actually interrupted menstrual cycles as well. So you can have optimal energy availability or energy going in, but if you're not consuming enough carbohydrate and that fat isn't being converted to carbohydrates, then the body basically thinks to itself, I don't have enough fuel to do this exercise, I'm going to start compromising something else. And that's where we see those issues pop up. I will quickly say too, particularly for the women amongst us, but also the men, there is some really good research coming out around the guys now as well, which is why we no longer call it the female athlete triad. We call it relative energy deficiency in sport. But what I will say is that as little as 4 days of insufficient carbohydrate or energy intake is enough to disrupt reproductive function in both women and men. So if you think those of you that are on high training loads, or like even if we get sick, we might have a crazy week, it actually doesn't take much to end up with 4 days of interrupted energy. Um, so carbohydrates, like we're sort of led to believe in non-athlete world that there is good and bad, even in athlete world. But I just want to say like there's good timing and not so good timing. So obviously the handful of lollies, like if we were to have that right now or in like half an hour, probably not great timing, to be doing that at this time of night and then going to bed. But if we were to do that, into a long run or a ride or a paddle, great. Couldn't think of anything better. So it's actually picking your times. Same goes for oats. If we were going to have oats now with some protein yogurt and some fruit because we underate today, then awesome. If we were going to have that in the middle of a massive session, hopeless and probably going to lead to some problems. So it's all about like the good timing and the not so good timing, good pairing, not so good pairing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about carbohydrate types in terms of like fructose and glucose in a minute because I'm just looking at my little question list down here. Someone did ask me what to look for in electrolytes and protein, so I will cover that in a little minute. But the bottom line is that carbs are necessary, and you just need them you need them to be eaten at appropriate times and appropriate amounts to utilize their performance advantage. So this is an example of using carbohydrates in a performance enhancing way for training. And sorry, I would have done this with photos and stuff, but there was a really good movie I wanted to watch, so it says a list. Um, so, like for example, pre-velocity, you know, you might have a banana, or because it's early in the morning, like if you're going to a live session, I believe, is it early in the morning, like 6 o'clock? Yeah. You might have a bottle of sports drink on your bike. I've never done one of those sessions, but I've sort of looked at them and heard about them, and you probably want something for that. Um, and so, if you were going to go the fluid route, you would have 250 mils of pure or whatever your poison of choice is prior, and then you'd finish the rest of it during the session. Then within half an hour, you do your breakfast. So, oats is just an example, eggs on toast is another example, protein yogurt with granola and a piece of toast is another example, a smoothie with a piece of toast. There's lots of options. And then depending on your load, how you're feeling after breakfast, you might have a snack. So I just use myself as an example, usually a coffee and something else. Then you might have lunch. Then say you're off for a run after work. So about an hour-ish before, you're going to have something else. You might have a 1 square meal bite, or like one of the smaller bars and a pear. Obviously, all day you'll be sipping away on some water, and then you'll get through that hour run. You like an up and go in the car on the way home, or like a decent protein muesli bar. It doesn't have to be an expensive protein bar. There are some really good ones out on the market now, just in the normal section, the normal muesli bar section. You just got to read the label, and just look for a higher protein option, and then dinner. So you can see there how I've used carbohydrates in a way that is going to fuel those sessions, but also we're not actually consuming too much more food than what we normally would. Oh, why isn't that working? Yeah, there we go. So we want to prioritize the nutritious, I don't know if that word is even a word, carbohydrates, and enjoy the fast acting ones when we really enjoy them. So if we're having an ice cream with kids or having some chocolate with a cup of tea, or if we need, when we need them immediately following a hard game or during a long, hard training. Yeah. So using fast carbs as a crutch because we haven't fueled or we've missed meals, or are stressed or, trying to drop weight is going to become a problem. So something that I will often see in athletes, and something that did come up as a question, is what do we do when we realize we haven't really eaten enough and now we're sort of standing at the pantry at 8 o'clock at night? This happens to me, I reckon, on average twice a week, where I'm like in the freezer real mad that there's no ice cream left or something. And so this is really common, particularly, we're all age groupers, or most of us are age groupers. We're all, juggling work, uni, family life, whatever that looks like for us. So it does inevitably happen. The first thing that I say to people when they're standing at the pantry at 8 o'clock is, are you actually, are you hungry or are you bored? The next thing I say is protein, so we can dribble on about this all night, but find a source of protein. So, yep, you might want some dark chocolate or some ice cream or something like that, but you're just going to have to whack some protein with it, yeah? So, it might look like a common one in my house actually is hummus and cheese on crackers, maybe some chopped fruit and, half a protein bar or something like that. And I will always put it on a plate so I can actually see what I'm eating, because otherwise you can stand at the pantry and then, half an hour later you've downed half a bag of chips or something like that. So it's good to pop it all on a plate, then you can kind of see what you're doing. Another option is protein yogurt, or a high protein Greek yogurt, some chopped apple or something, and some granola on top. So we're just kind of thinking about it. We're not, sometimes you will just honestly want to polish off a bowl of ice cream, and that's cool. But if that starts happening 2 to 3 times a week in large amounts, then we need to start asking some questions about, you know, what we could do instead, maybe a couple of those times, or how can we make sure that there's enough fuel going in during the day? Yeah. So this is, I'm just going to move. How do I move this? I'm just going to move this one. Oh, yeah. So this is just, our sort of carbohydrate types or amounts in our different foods, just to give you an idea, and the amount we're looking at. So if we're training for sort of under that 90-minute mark, then, or sort of around that hour mark, then 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of body weight will usually suffice. 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight, for 90 minutes and over. And then that sort of recovery post-training, which I think is quite important, over 90 minutes, is about a gram per kilogram of body weight. Now, I haven't put the grams per kilogram of body weight for you to all sit there working out exactly how much you need per day and then start measuring it. And there's always a bit of a risk with including measurements on here. But I'd also be doing you a disservice if I didn't, because this is best practice sports nutrition. So it's really just to show you that actually, say we are averaging about 90 minutes or 2 hours a day, we are kind of aiming for that 5 to 6 grams minimum. And it kind of just gives you an idea of actually, I do need to include carbohydrate foods in my day, with all my meals and snacks, and probably during training as well, to make sure that I get enough to fuel everyday activity, training, and then the adaptation that is taking place following training as well. And I'll also add that, like, the likes of your Bobby bananas, I know some people don't really like bananas, but bananas in like a smoothie is a really good way with, by the time you chuck a Weet-Bix in, drizzle of honey, a banana, some milk, you get the carbs from all of that, throw a piece of toast with it, and it's pretty quick. You're pretty quick to hit that 80 to 90 gram mark. So after a training session, don't let this daunt you, the amount of carbohydrate. I'll also just do a little plug for old mate pasta. People kind of knock pasta, but for 125 grams uncooked, 85 grams is pretty good. So they are sort of quite good things to include, to get that carbohydrate intake up. Yeah, so this is protein. I think we looked at this last time. And so we're just looking at similar stuff here. So again, I'm not asking you to all go and calculate how much protein you should be having. This will, of course, be different for each of you depending on your goals and your, health. But around, we're aiming for over a gram per kilogram of body weight per day. The New Zealand standard for protein, standard recommendation for protein is horribly low, like so low that I would hope everyone would be having more than that in their breakfast. So, we are looking at, I would be hoping that everybody on this call would be hitting close to 100 grams of protein a day. And specifically, we would be hoping to see 20 to 30 grams in that recovery after training. And yes, your flat white coffee counts. flat white coffee and a nothing naughty protein bar will get you to 25 grams, just saying. Actually, while we're there, I'm going to cover a question. Um, oh, yep, I'm going to cover a couple of questions actually. Let's go back to this slide. So, I had a question about being fatigued or experiencing fatigue or sort of nothing in the tank during a long session a few weeks out from an event. And I just want to cover that one because, first of all, we all know how emotionally crap that is. You know, you're a few weeks out from an event, you feel really a little bit flat coming towards the end of that long session. Um, the first thing I'll say is, and it sounds like this person did eat and drink enough in that session. So obviously, first of all, like, what are you doing during the session? Are you having enough? Did you have breakfast? What was sleep like? All of that. The next thing I would say though is really going back to those nutritious carbohydrates and particularly thinking about what we're doing the day before and the days prior to that. What happens when we use or when we have a lot of the more fast or treaty carbs? So, for example, if we had like lollies, chocolate, lots of desserts, whatever, leading up to that long, hard training or race, is that we can see we see those sort of blood glucose levels go up, down, up, down, up, down, and not necessarily they don't necessarily, depending on their glycemic index or glycemic the overall glycemic load, they don't necessarily store as well as those lower glycemic index carbohydrates. So the first thing that I would say in that sense is like thinking about, right, what are we doing when we're not training? Yeah. So like using the likes of Mars bar or, I'm just making this up now, but like lollies or whatever while we're training. Outside of training, we are having wholemeal wraps, we're having, potatoes and kumara, we're having those more long acting or slow release carbohydrates. That would kind of be where I'd go with that if the person that asked that question had eaten or fueled themselves well during the session. The next thing I would say would be have a yarn with Ray about it because he'll know more about your training and where you're at in your training, and it might just be like an isolated dip, I guess. We all have them, and not letting that completely destroy your confidence and all the work that you've done prior to that. The next thing I was asked in a question was around what would I look for in products. So particularly electrolyte supplements or electrolyte drinks and protein powders. So the first thing I will say, actually, I was just reading a paper on protein powders earlier today. The first thing I'll say about protein powders is we know whey protein is far superior to any other. And the reason for that is because of its digestibility, for just being far superior. The next in line after that is soy protein. So I'd be looking for whey protein. If you can't tolerate that, I'd be going for soy. I wouldn't be going for, unless you absolutely had to, pea protein, rice protein, any of those other random ones, unless you absolutely had to. And if you were going for those ones, then you would need to add another complementary protein to ensure that you had enough amino acids to create a complete protein, if that makes sense. The other thing to watch with protein powders is that to make them taste good, they like to add sweeteners. Adding sweeteners, ideally you want like a sugar alcohol or a stevia or something like that rather than your artificial sweeteners, which can cause gut distress and have been shown to cause gut distress in endurance athletes for up to 40 hours after, or increase gut distress for up to 40 hours post ingestion. So something to think about. Otherwise, just find a flavour that works for you. If you're racing internationally, then you need to get something that is an informed sport choice and has been batch tested. Because although we're age groupers, like none of us want to be in that position. Electrolytes depends on what you're doing, depends a little bit about how your gut works, and how I guess robust your gut is. Also depends what you like. I don't really like professionally, I'm not going to recommend brands really, but personally, I'm a pure and peak fuel girl. I find their products taste good. They're New Zealand made. They've been batch tested by Informed Sport, or you can get batches of their product that has been tested, which tells me that their products are safe. Yeah, it really depends whether how good your gut is and how long you're training or racing for. Typically, we would look for glucose to fructose ratios, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. I would just be assessing how much of it you're planning to take in. If you're planning to just fuel on electrolytes for 3 hours and nothing else, it's going to be way more important you pick one that one you like and two you can afford because they get really expensive. But basically, just don't buy Powerade would be my first thing. Don't buy Gatorade would be my next thing, and don't buy Loaded because they might as well have a Coca-Cola sticker on them. Get something powdered like your Peak Fuels, Pures, Balance. Tailwind's a good one. Yeah, there's plenty out there. Feel free to ask me about specific ones at the end if you like. Yeah, cool. So an example around how we'd fuel a 40-minute swim. So, assuming this is in the morning, little bobby banana, bit of water at the pool, and then our normal breakfast is fine. 80-minute run. So we're going to go like honey on toast with some banana. Ideally white toast, to be honest. Maybe wholemeal if you want. Depending on how long the 80-minute run or how intense you're working. You're going to probably have some water at some point if you want, and a gel. And then at the end of that, you're going to have your normal breakfast plus a glass of orange juice. Now, orange juice is a really great way to increase carbohydrate intake in a nice, tasty way, too. So we're not drinking electrolytes, which we've had all day on the bike or whatever. We're having a glass of orange juice, and for those of us that take iron supplements, really good time to take your iron supplement. 2.5 hour bike ride. We are going to go the 2 pieces of toast with honey and banana, a glass of orange juice. We're going to have 2 bottles, 3 bliss balls, and a good handful of lollies, roughly. Now, look, you can buy lots of sports bars and things. I'm all for, it's all well and good having the sports bars, and you'll probably see in that video I had up, I really like the Primal bars, but they're $5 each. So, you kind of weigh it up a little bit. I'm all for buying the Pam's Jubes and the budget whole food balls or whatever they are on special. Yeah, do you, but you don't have to spend a lot of money to fuel your training. And then afterwards, we're going for a mocha. See what I did there? So the mocha has got a bit of chocolate syrup, which is going to up the carbohydrate content, the protein in the milk, and then we've got our usual breakfast as well. Red flags. So these are all the things that nobody really wants to talk about until they're forced to. And I'd say that everybody has presented with at least one of these at some stage, everyone that I've worked with. And if you are or have experienced any of these recently, you probably need to think, and they've continued. So, like your one off bad session or something, or bad week because you've had a huge week at work is not a big, like you don't need to worry about that. But thinking like, am I eating enough for my training? Am I under fueling? Because that is one of the most common causes of blips and issues. And secondly, do I need to revise what I'm doing to recover? And in that case, you need to talk to Ray because he will support you with that. Um, sorry, I'm having issues with, oh yeah, here we go. So these are actually little like nude coloured flags, but they are supposed to be red. So you're constantly getting sick or taking a long time to recover from being unwell. So that's a big red flag, particularly for underfueling, for not getting enough carbohydrates. Um, there's a few reasons for that. One is temperature regulation is one of the first things to go. And being out in the cold all the time if we're not fueling enough can predispose us to having lower immunity. You're not enjoying your training anymore. Massive red flag. Like you might have the odd session where you're like, oh, that sucks, and you hate Ray, but most of it you should, sorry, Ray, they don't really hate you. But most of it you should actually be getting out and enjoying. So I have this conversation, I reckon I've had this conversation with like 80% of athletes that I've worked with about not enjoying their training. And usually it's because they're not recovering properly, they're exhausted, so they're not sleeping well. And once those things are fixed, they're enjoying themselves again. You're experiencing weight loss, like rapid, and you are losing weight. So that's either intentional or unintentional. We can expect weight and shape variances as we get closer to events, and that inadvertent underfueling and I guess body composition changing happens. But if we're experiencing weight loss, then it is actually a red flag for athletes, and certainly not something I celebrate in my endurance athletes because to me there's a whole lot of risk with that. You're weighing yourself more than once a week or at all. I always ask athletes, why are you weighing yourself? Like, unless you're actually having to weigh in to be under a certain weight for a boxing match, we actually shouldn't need to be standing on the scales. It's not a performance measure. It's purely a body mass measure that if we are training well and recovering well, our performance will be looked after. So I have like 12 sets of scales in my cupboards over there that I've confiscated from people for that reason, and their performance has increased after doing that. Menstrual cycle is missing in action, or you're having irregular periods. So that's a huge red flag. Obviously, for those of us that are over 40, for those that are over 40, that's a little bit different, or within that first 2 years of getting your first period, we can expect irregular ones. But for those of us outside those two windows, we really want regular menstrual cycles. Your libido, so that's for men and women, is unexpectedly diminishing. Again, there are stages of life where that is normal, but that is a really big red flag, and people are often surprised when I talk to them about this in clinic, but it is a big red flag for both men and women. If that has changed drastically, then that is an indication that sex hormones are changing, and therefore other body systems are at risk. You're experiencing regular injuries, particularly bony. So, how this often will show up is shin splints or foot issues or hip issues, particularly for endurance athletes. So, if we're experiencing that, we need to take a really good close look at nutrition intake, particularly calcium, vitamin D, and overall energy. And we need to make sure that if you are female, then you're menstruating and ovulating. Restricting foods or food groups without being medically required to, that's also a red flag, so we don't want that happening. Feeling sick or getting reoccurring tummy upsets while training. So I see a lot of underfueling outside of training, and then people think, right, particularly those that are trying to manage or lose weight, right, I'm going to feel really well during my session, so I get good results from it. That is a really, really, really good way to make your intestines hate you. And to speed up that transit time and unfortunately speed up the time that you need to get to the toilet. So if there's one thing that I can say to you, it's don't just suddenly decide to fuel during your long sessions and not outside of them, or you will need to get on Google Maps and find those public toilets, or get some black shorts. Um, you are extremely tired, and sleep or a couple of rest days don't resolve it. And I'm sure Ray would agree with me here. That, if you're, extremely exhausted and sleep in a couple of rest days don't resolve it, then we need to do something about that. And the sooner you do, the sooner you'll recover. With the sleep situation, a symptom of low energy availability or RED-S is sleep disruption. So if you're suddenly struggling to sleep, then there's a high chance, and maybe you're not fueling adequately, or you're in a huge mileage phase of your training, which makes low energy availability more likely, then you know, sleep will be impacted and you need to fuel more. So you'll be picking up that most of them is to actually just eat more, periodize your nutrition intake, eat regular meals, fuel while you're training, fuel before you're training. And some of you may require more individualized support, and that's not a plug for me, but that is just reality, and that everybody has different goals, everybody has different bodies. What works for, Jess isn't necessarily going to work for Stu. What works for me isn't necessarily going to work for Ray. Everybody is really different. And that's something I've found in clinic, is that actually there is no cookie cutter because everybody is different. And the other answer for many of these is actually with your coach. So actually having those conversations, I really encourage you to have those honest conversations really early about, if you are if you are experiencing extreme fatigue, or you are, your menstrual cycle has gone missing and you're trying to increase your nutrition intake, I encourage you to talk to Ray. Because while, he's probably not going to write you a nutrition plan or something, he can help you to actually prioritize your training sessions to help you increase that energy availability. There is a question that I haven't answered that I'm just going to quickly cover around late night training. So those of us, people that work late and then they are training late at night, and if they're fueling during a bike or a run session, for example, with bars, electrolytes, gels, should they be still eating afterwards? Now, there's a few things here. So the first thing that I would say is that I would assume that dinner is being eaten prior to training in this case. And if that is happening, so say for example, dinner's happening at about 6, then training, we're eating while we're training for a long session, definitely we still want some recovery happening there. And actually protein and many of the amino acids in protein-rich foods are going to support that sleep. And that down regulation of stress hormones, which have risen as a result of training. What I wouldn't be suggesting is high glycemic index carbohydrates late at night. So fuel away while you do your training. As soon as you finish training, your recovery might look like a Milo with a scoop of protein powder. Yeah, so like a warm it sounds gross, warm protein shake, but you know what I mean, like a Milo with a scoop of unflavored whey protein. If you hate protein powder, which personally, like I'd tell people to take protein powder if they can stomach it, I hate it. I just can't stand it. Um, I'm all for adding a extra tablespoon of milk powder into your smoothies or into your Milo or hot chocolate. So that's another good way to boost A, calcium intake and B, protein intake. If you didn't feel like that, then you could do like um, piece of wholemeal toast with some protein peanut butter. You could do a cup of chicken noodle soup or something like that. I mean, it kind of depends on the time of night, but those are the things that I would be thinking straight off the bat. If dinner hadn't been eaten, so like if we hadn't had like, I don't know, meat and three veg or, like a nutritious hit of vegetables and protein and carbs, then I hate to say it, but that meal needs to happen after training. So whether or not it is, um, a slightly smaller serving and you might have a bigger pre-training snack. But yeah, either way, we don't want to be missing the nutrients from that main meal because if we think about dinner, we think about iron, zinc, calcium, all of the antioxidants and things that usually sit in those main meals. I hope that helps. If I didn't quite cover it, feel free to ask or bring it to the next session. I think I'm nearly done. Sorry, it's kind of the presentation that continues going on and on and on. Training and adaptation. So this is just my little cycle around, obviously we do our training, we cause micro tears, we put stress under our body systems, we use up that glycogen or the stored carbohydrates, and we cause a bit of stress in our bone or skeletal structures, particularly for running. Then we recover, and that's protein, carbs, fluids, and sleep. Then comes the adaptation. So if we skip the recovery or we skip the training, there's no adaptation, or adaptation is compromised. And adaptation is where, we get stronger, we get more efficient, our bones get stronger. People often will say weight-bearing exercise increases your bone density, not if the nutrition's not there, you know. So, and same with like if the nutrition's there and the training's not, then your bones aren't going to be as strong. So that's where I'm going with that cycle. So training and recovery are just as important as each other. And that is us. Sorry, once again, well over time. But us breezers are never on time. That is my married name. We're always late. So I think have I stopped sharing my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, you have. Thanks, Jade. Some fantastic information there. And you say the breezers are never on time. The breezers are extremely busy and they're trying to fit in a lot into any day. So before we move through into the question phase of the evening, a couple of things that Jade brought up that I'm going to take on board for the early morning velocity or the online trainer sessions that I do. I'm pretty much doing them fasted. I eat dinner in the evening and then I go to sleep and get up and jump on my bike. I might have a bottle of electrolyte, but I'm doing them fasted. So I'm going to start fueling prior to, so I've got a little bit more energy in the tank for them moving forward. And you also had a slide there with the word nutritive on it. And you said, I don't know if that's a word or not. And I don't know that either. So I Googled it. And yes, it is a word. And it means providing nourishment. So perfectly used. So you must have had that via osmosis at some point. So as always, we'll go around the room with questions. We'll have the questions directed at Jade first time through. If there's any questions about your training that are more directed towards me as opposed to the nutrition or the nutrition in consultation with your overall training, fire them away to Jade the first round. The second round, the ones more targeted for me. Now everyone's jumbled up again. I think Stu was there first, but we'll just go clockwise around my screen. So we'll start with you, Jess.
I actually have no questions. Thank you.
Nice and easy. We'll move over to you, Tanya.
Kia ora. No, I don't have any questions either.
Kelly.
G'day, I'll just unmute myself. No, I think Jade answered a couple of my questions there. Probably one just slightly left field question, saying I've got a nutritionist who I can ask this question to, and I'm looking at my two boys sitting on the floor. They're about to start swim club training. They're 11 and 13, and they swim for an hour at a time, 3 times a week. I've normally been pretty good at fueling for them, as telling them that they need to have a decent afternoon tea and something to eat straight away after swimming. I guess the same sort of principle just applies there in terms of just good whole foods with carbs and some protein for growing boys.
Yeah, so 3 times a week, for an hour each session.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it being on. So like what I'd be doing there, you're dead right. So growing teenage boys. So I would be advocating for, a big afternoon snack, and encouraging probably some higher GI carbs. So, the likes of jam and, jam and banana on toast, or it might look like a cheese toasty with a glass of orange juice, or it might look like, a bowl of wheat bix with some fruit and milk, like whatever that looks like for them, but definitely. And then you're being on with getting them to eat something afterwards as well. So, for growing adolescents, particularly, and in fact for adults as well, if we don't like protein powders, the likes of chocolate milk, dare I say it, or like a smoothie made with frozen banana, Milo, and milk is a fantastic recovery snack. And I use that with adults as well that are really struggling to fuel. Um, Whatever we're eating, and I think I said this in the first session, we really need to enjoy, and because otherwise we're not going to do it. So yeah, you're bang on, Kelly. Decent afternoon tea, something afterwards, and then a good dinner.
I laughed then because they're just sitting past me. I'm on my phone, and they both grinned when you said wheat bix and bananas, because they both eat about 6 wheat bix for breakfast in the morning. So there you go, boys. Jade said you can have wheat bix before swimming. Okay, so they're cracking up at that.
But
Awesome.
they also, I mean, very important for recovery is making sure all those vegetables at dinner time are eaten, um,
Yeah,
to get all the antioxidants.
yeah. No, we're a meat and 3 veg family, so I'm
Yeah,
normally pretty organised on swimming nights to have food sorted, so we can be eating not long after we get back in the door.
good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Otherwise it's I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Sorry,
that's cool.
Mum. I've only
Thank you for
just
that.
realised how annoying that is. Yeah, no worries.
Awesome.
Stu, we'll move over to you then.
No, I'm all good. No questions.
Sweet. We'll move around the second time. If you do have something that's popped up that you want to ask Jade, I was going to say from someone else's questions, but it's Kelly's question, or something that you've just thought of, feel free to include that. Or if there's a question about your training targeted towards me. Jess.
I guess I do have a question for Jade, that I've randomly thought of. It's kind of random, but is there like a point where it's like an overfueling part? Because obviously you can underfuel and then fuel, but where is it where it's like overfueling, where it's a bit too much?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think something that most of us sort of think of, like, where's the line here? Um, what I would say first and foremost is that specifically for endurance athletes, it is quite hard to overfuel. But there are cases, I have seen it a couple of times, but more so I see it happen when there are a lot of those less nutritious foods being eaten outside of training. So of course, like the likes of, lollies, ice cream, takeaways, all of those things, like all good to have outside of training, but if they're being eaten all the time, then it's really easy to overfuel. But typically speaking, if we're eating, mostly nourishing foods day to day, and we're just fueling our workouts, it doesn't normally happen in endurance athletes. But it's certainly something, it's a valid question. And it's certainly something, I think we all kind of bear in mind, particularly when we feel like we're just eating a million times a day, because it can feel like that, you just never stop. You're kind of like a grazing cow sometimes when you're training a lot and trying to fuel. But yeah, I guess a really good indicator of, first of all, making sure that you've got enough fuel is making sure that you're ticking all those boxes with like immune function, menstrual cycles, sleeping well, all of those things. If they're happening, then then you kind of start watching for feeling sluggish during workouts. Generally by feel, like if you're wearing, you're putting your training gear on and you're like, oh, I just don't feel quite the same, then you kind of know, and then it at that point helps to talk to someone like me or a registered dietitian, because then we can make sure that actually, like, is your nutrition periodized? Are you, you know, having more of those, lollies and things outside of training? But typically doesn't. I honestly could count on one hand the number of times I've even seen people eating enough for their training, let alone overfueling. Like, it never happens. Like, I've worked with so many athletes, and it just like it's almost shocking to me if I see someone and I'm like, shit, here's someone actually eating enough. Like, it's incredible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. That was a great answer.
No worries.
Alrighty, moving on to you, Tanya. Kelly? And background to Stu?
So Jade, like you watch GCN and all that, and they talk about like the pros and guys that are really working. So should you be aiming to be banging down sort of like 800 to 1,000 grams of carbs an hour? Like that's what these guys do apparently. Like you've just got to keep fueling and just keep bombing it down the throat.
Yeah. 800 to 1,000 grams an hour is extreme. I've never seen that before.
I think Stu was meaning 80 to 100. I've seen a
Oh,
video recently, yeah.
Yeah, 80 to 100, but
okay.
they're doing that over the course of like 5 hours, so it
Yeah.
accumulates that they're taking
Yeah.
truckload.
Yeah, so I've worked with a couple of pro cyclists that I have had consuming at that rate. And the short answer to that is absolutely not for a recreational athlete usually. Typically, recreational, sorry, I don't mean to sound, like I'm belittling anybody's level of athlete, but for non-pros, I would say, the pros are working at such a rate and clearing and buffering lactic acid at such a rate that they are their systems become extremely efficient at oxidizing carbohydrates very quickly and using them as fuel, more so than the non-professional athlete. So I would, yeah, I have not seen performance advantages in non-professionals, and actually I haven't seen them tolerated either. Like, I've had a couple of athletes that have insisted on taking 90 grams an hour to see whether it helps, and normally they crack at about the 2 to 3 hour mark, and start like, stomach cramps, feeling nauseous, because I think the other thing to remember with carbohydrate oxidation or oxidation in the gut is that we need quite large amounts of sodium to also do that. And so if we throw a whole heap of sodium at you, a whole heap of carb at you, and you're not able to clear it and oxidize it at a fast rate, it's going to pull in that GI tract, and the blood flow is basically going to reduce to that space, and from there we can start to see some nasty stuff happen. So I'm not saying it's a no. If you can tolerate it, then yeah. But I really try and get my athletes to tolerate the 60 gram an hour, and most people can't even tolerate that, to be fair. I certainly can't. Mine's 40. Otherwise, I'll just be shitting in a bush for the rest of the day. So 40 grams an hour. For me, try 60. And if you can tolerate 60, then you can try and push it up, but leave good time to do that. Don't trial it close to race day, would be my advice. Yeah. But yeah, there are performance advantages if you can tolerate it, and if your system is working at a really efficient rate. Yeah.
So, because that race fuel stuff from Peak Fuel, that's 90 grams in an hour, like for a bottle.
Yeah.
So that's what I was reading in Wanaka. So it was like I had 2 bottles of that before I went on to the electrolyte stuff that they had.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to stop cramping, but I still cramp up.
Yeah. So the other thing that I would be suggesting with cramping, like I think, cramping's a really interesting one, because we actually have no good evidence with cramping that, other than carbohydrate intake and good electrolyte balance, we have no evidence beyond that to suggest that anything is really useful other than being well trained to what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And I guess beyond that would be a conversation around this is just my thoughts and my experience working with athletes. I'm certainly not a biophysician, but it would be around body position, physiology, whether or not your shoes are right, all of those other things that go alongside sports performance.
Cool. Cheers.
Welcome.
You're exactly right with the exercise-induced cramping there, Jade. The body needs to be trained and exposed to the intensity and the position that you're using, and the duration for the race that you're doing. Now, there's a bit of a range. You train for the middle, and you can perform either side of it as well. So if you're a long course athlete, all of a sudden trying to run a fast 5K and haven't spent that time at the VO2 max intensity, that is likely to cause some cramping issues for you. If you're running fast at an intensity that you haven't trained for a long time, that's likely to trigger cramping. Conversely, if you've done a lot of short duration training and trying to participate or compete in a long distance event, towards the end of that long distance event, you're very likely to trigger cramping as well. So thanks for your time this evening, Jade. Once again, full of pearls of wisdom. Plenty of fantastic information there. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your contribution. I'll be hanging out waiting for the 3rd installment of your series. It is going to be a few weeks away before we can line things up, but rest assured that 3rd presentation will be coming later on in a few weeks down the track. So once again, thanks, Jade. Really appreciate your time. If there's any final questions, feel free to jump on and fire away. But thanks for joining us, everyone. Ka kite anō. Have a fantastic evening.
Thanks, Jade, and thanks, Ray.
No
You're welcome,
worries.
Thanks,
Tanya.
team.
Great.
Cheers,
Cheers,
Stu.
Jade.
See ya. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Jess.